We're coming to the end of this series this morning, and that we've looked at with the subject of anxiety, and we come to Psalm 23. It's probably the most well-known psalm. It could be the most beloved psalm. Has a great message for us. I think if we just look at it, there's beautiful imagery, and it's kind of a calming scene that it paints for us, but if you look deeper, there's more to it than that. It isn't just a beautiful, nice picture of a peaceful scene, like the cover of a greeting card. It does more, and I hope you've picked up that pattern in the passages we've looked at, that they have some real teeth to them. They have some real meat to them. And so as we look at it this morning, first of all, we need to put it in the context of the book of Psalms. So when we look at Psalms, there's a lot of worship poetry. Some of it was meant to be sung, maybe all of it. And so it would have been used in the worship of the temple worship of the people of God. And so it has more structure than you might at first notice. And so there are 5 books of Psalms or collections of Psalms in the Psalter. And so there are 5 major sections that kind of follow a certain theme, and then within that there are shorter sections that have a grouping of psalms that are very closely linked and really tell something of the same story of the people of God. And Psalm 23 starts one of those smaller collections, and so it begins to tell the story of traveling on pilgrimage towards the temple. The people of God, there were 12 tribes and they were spread out by some distance, but there was this travel that they did towards temple worship. And so there were times of year when they would go to travel by foot to the temple, and we've got psalms that tell us the story of that. There's one psalm that says, I lift my eyes to the hills, where does my help come from? And people think, well, yeah, your eyes are up looking at the hills, and you're just looking a little higher and seeing God, and the majesty of the mountain is kind of inspiring you on your journey. That's not what was happening there. When they got to the end of their journey, they had to climb up Mount Zion to go to the temple. So they'd get to the part where they were most weary, the most tired, they'd been through the most, they were low on supplies, and they'd face this mountain and they'd go, I lift my eyes to the mountain. How am I ever going to climb that thing? How am I ever going to get there? And so there was this sense of pilgrimage, and so there is this journey that Psalm 23 and those psalms following it up to Psalm 30 have in common. They're talking about this story of pilgrims moving towards worship. And so the last verse tells us the destination of the journey is the house of the Lord. And so David writes this, yes, King David, the guy who was a shepherd boy who slayed enemies of the sheep like wolves and lions, and then in his later years as a soldier king, he went into battle and of course killed Goliath. But David, as the author of this psalm, he knew something about sheep, right? Like that was his origin story. That's where he came from. He knew about shepherds and he knew about sheep. He knew what his responsibilities were to protect the sheep under his care. He knew what it was to lead them to a new pasture, no matter how close or how far he had to take them. He knew what it was to sit with the sheep, and he knew what it was to travel with the sheep. And so that image comes to his mind as he thinks of pilgrims moving towards worship. And he writes this song for use in the worship of the early believers. And so David writes this and begins with this metaphor and says, the Lord's my shepherd, I have all I need. God's the shepherd, David's the sheep. He says, he's my shepherd. He looks after me. He does what I did for the sheep. He takes care of me. He provides everything I need. And so he leads the sheep like me. And so God provides for travelers like David on the way that the shepherd does for his sheep as they travel. And they have everything they need along the journey. They're provided with green meadows so that they can lie down and rest. And if you're traveling for long, rest is important, right? And so they were traveling by foot. They'd get tired, and to find a good place to rest, to know where it was that you needed to reach, to find that spot where it's perfect to rest. And he says, God leads me like a shepherd. He leads me to green pastures where I can just lie down and I can rest. and recover my muscles and get ready to take on the journey again. He leads me to peaceful streams that provide water in the desert when it's hot and you need water to keep traveling. And he takes us to those places where we can find water, and he leads us beside the stream. It's a peaceful stream, but if you're a sheep, that's still a dangerous place to be because you can fall into the water and drown. And so he leads our steps, he says. He leads me beside the quiet water. It's not a big danger, but there's danger there. And so he keeps them safe. And so they're able to enjoy the scenery, enjoy the grass, enjoy the water that provides for their needs. And it's pretty personal for David. He says, he lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths. For David, he knows what it is to walk with God. And he says, just like I looked after my sheep, and it was my job to make sure they were provided for, make sure they could rest when they needed to, make sure that they had all the water they needed. God provides for me along the journey. When he knows what it is to travel and the things that you can encounter on travel, but he keeps me safe, and he gives me everything I need, and he looks after me as I'm going and keeps me safe, bringing honor to his name. God knows and is known as a provider, as the one who looks after them, provides and protects. And so he lets me, he leads me, he renews me, he guides me. But if you lived in Israel, if you've ever visited, I don't know if anybody here ever been to the Holy Land? I won't call you out more than that. There's at least one. You talk to Willie after and you ask her, is this a normal scene in the Holy Land? Green grass, like you'd find in, we see pictures of Ireland, you go rolling hills, right? Lots of green, lots of grass. That's not the case in the Holy Land, am I right? Yeah. Sometimes you can find it. It's not that there's none of it, but it's rare. And it's rare to find peaceful streams because it's pretty dry. It's a desert climate. There's not a whole lot of rivers flowing everywhere. But you could find some, and they were rare and they were precious when you found them, because then you can restock your water. If you found a meadow, a green meadow to lie down in, to provide for the sheep, that was a good spot to stop and rest. If you found a peaceful stream, you go, well, we're going to drink all that we can drink right now, and then we're going to stock up. We're going to fill up so that we can take water with us and we can provide for the rest of the journey. Because it might not all be this easy. It won't be that easy in that climate. And so if you were traveling as a traveler or as a sheep, you knew that you faced circumstances where you needed to find the right spots to get what you needed so you could continue on your journey. And so it was something precious. It was something rare. And David's saying, God provides for me like that. There are moments when it's so sweet and he provides what's abnormally comfortable for me. He provides for me in such a way that I got this abundance. I've just got the right place and the right way to rest, and I've got everything that I need, and I've got all the water I could take on, and everything's sweet and comfortable and good, and I can see his protection in the way he looks after me. I can feel the sense that he's providing for me, and I'm thankful for those moments when it stands out against the rest of my travels, and God just provides in such an incredible way. And so David's grateful for that. And he says, it's like that sometimes. And it's so good when God does these things for you. And so the psalm became known, and he shared it with the people of God, because he knew that, sometimes you just need to be reminded that God's good to us. He does stuff for us. He provides for us. He protects us in ways when we're in danger that we don't even realize. And so as much as that's an abnormal kind of scene, it stands out in stark contrast to the average scenery and the average way that the environment is in the Holy Land, there are other places that are darker. And so David describes this reality with a beautiful picture, but now he describes a different reality, a reality of the journey that talks about the hard parts. And so most of us have figured out that journeying with God doesn't always have those sweet times where you feel like, man, I'm so blessed, right? And David knows that. And so he describes that reality with a word picture that's a different kind of landscape. And he says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, Even when I walk through the darkest valley. As flocks of sheep traveled, there were times when the only route you could take was into a desert wadi. It's like a dry stream bed. You might have to travel through there. And the way that those dead stream beds worked is like water. It'd be running down in the winter. You know, as the melt happened, everything flowed through and carved these canyons, these dry creek beds, if you will. And so along those dead stream beds where everything was dry and close, and you know, if you're up on the plains, well, a little breeze could come by and give you some comfort. But if you're down in there with the cliffs beside you, worn into the valley, then you're down there and the air is hot and close and stale. And it didn't move very much, and the walls meant that the sunlight didn't all get down there, so it was darker. It's not as bright. And some of you, like me, got a little bit of seasonal affective disorder, and you know when it gets dark outside in the winter, you get bummed, right? It's horrible. And so these dark kind of valleys would be very, very challenging for a sheep and a shepherd. And David says, sometimes it's sweet. Sometimes you can feel the blessings all around you, and God's providing for you. Like it's just, everything's going like it should. You're getting all the rest you need, and you're getting all the water you need, and everything's good, and it feels like that. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it gets really dark, and it feels like the cliffs are blocking out the sun, and sometimes you don't have everything you need, and the air is dark and hot and oppressive, and you feel slowed down and worn out. But he says, even in this dark part of the journey, even when things are oppressive, even when everything feels bleak, God still guides him like a shepherd. He says, I won't be afraid because the Lord is with me. His rod and his staff, they comfort me. Knowing he's got that rod, so if animals are waiting in there, in that valley, and they come at me, he's got that rod, and he'll go to battle for me. He'll protect me. His staff, guides my feet. He nudges me. Sometimes he needs to nudge me really hard to get me on the path, keep me in the right way, so we can make it out the other side of the valley and get back to the sunshine again. And so in the peaceful times, he provides for me. But in the dark valley, he's still looking after me, even though it's dark. And so he speaks of these times, David, and he says the journey's like that. Like the journey to be in that place where we could get to the temple and we could worship God. Sometimes it's like that, like sheep and shepherds. Sometimes we go through the good places and the sweet times when we feel God's presence and we feel what he's doing for us. And then there's other times when it gets pretty bleak and it gets pretty hard. And so in David's time, the worshipers would go to the temple. They'd sing these songs together to remind them of the journey they'd just taken to be there. And it took effort. Like they had to put in the time. It wasn't like just getting in your car and driving to church, right? And they'd put in that effort, and they'd get there, and they'd sing these songs together going, like, we made it through that. And so it came to mean something to them. And then in the later era of the people of God, in the time of like Esther or Daniel, there were times when they were far from God, like they were taken to other places, other parts of the world. They weren't traveling from one of the other tribes for miles and miles. They were so far away, they couldn't get to the temple. They couldn't go back there. Sometimes they were prevented. Daniel was dragged away into exile in Babylon, and there was no way for him to get back. He wasn't allowed to leave. And so the people of God in those times when they were in exile would sing these songs in a different way. And their hearts would reach out and they go, man, if I could just be back there among the people of God, people who think like me, people who love God like me, and we could sing together. We could feel that closeness to God. And they'd sing those songs about the journey going there. And the journey was longer and the journey would have been harder. But they go, man, if I could head out right now, I'd be on the road in a minute. If I could just get back to that place where I felt God's presence so close and he's looking after me and I'm singing my heart out to him with psalms like this among other people who love God as much as I do. That's what my heart longs for. And so David says it's like that. We've passed through both those times. And for us in our day, it's infinitely easier to get in your car and drive to church. But we all know that there are things that hold us back sometimes. And it might not be the physical journey that gets in the way, but there are things that happen. There are circumstances in life. There are anxieties that arise. There are circumstances that crush us. And we go, I just feel the weight of getting there to that place where I feel close to God. I don't feel it. And even if I show up in church, I'm not gonna really be there. I'm not gonna be 100% engaged in this. Because there's things getting in the way in my life. There are things that are holding me back. There are things that are weighing me down. And I feel so heavy, like every step's just a burden. There are things that cause anxiety. There are things that create dis-ease in us. Where you just don't feel like nothing's easy. And it weighs us down and holds us back. There are things that keep us from really experiencing God's presence, even sometimes when we're sitting right here and when we're singing these songs and when we're hearing God's word. And there's things within us that hold us back and weigh us down and make life heavy. And we're like, how do I get past that? How do I get through that? And so David says, there are sweet times, and then there are times that are really struggling, and it's an effort, but I'm not going to be afraid because I know God's with me. I know he's still protecting me. He's still working for me, even if I'm going through that hard valley. And then David, in the next part of the psalm, moves away from the sheep and shepherd thing altogether, and he paints a different picture again. And he moves to this picture of a traveler, and he says, he pictures it as a feast. And he says, you provide a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. Like I'm right there in that dark place. And my enemies are right there. Like they're watching me. They're right there. And if you've ever been somewhere where you're around people that don't like you very much, and you feel their eyes on you, and you go, how do I try to focus on something else? And you feel like it's hard to relax. Somebody comes and sits with you at a table at a wedding or something, and you go, man, if they seat me with that person now, it's going to be an awkward night. I'm not going to be able to enter into conversation, and I feel like I just want to go home now, but I'll stay because I've been invited and I'm here. And it can be really awkward. David says, my enemies are right there. Like we're not going through good times and then bad parts of the journey. The same thing is happening at the same time. It's like he blends both of those other scenes together. And he says, you prepare a feast for me, and my enemy's right there. I feel their presence. I feel their eyes shooting daggers at me. I feel the hatred all around me. But you're feasting. I'm feasting on your goodness. God, you're providing this table before me. And he says, you anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over. You prepare this feast for me, and then you anoint my head with oil. That's what they did when you're a dinner guest. You came in, and if you're an honored guest, they anointed your head with oil. It was one of the ways they said, come in off the road and feel like you've been cared for. It was an act of hospitality. And he says, I'm right there in these desert places. I'm in the middle of the journey, and I'm feasting on your goodness while the dark forces in my life are feeling so close that I'm aware of them and I'm aware of you at the exact same moment. He says, I'm feasting while they're hating. And they're not backing off for a minute. He's not scaring them away. He's just saying, I got you. The enemies are right there, but it doesn't matter because we are feasting on God's goodness. And so these anxious circumstances aren't removed, but God resources us in a way that minimizes the damage that they can do to us. He goes, don't focus on them. Don't focus on that. Don't focus on the things that are dragging you down. They're still true, but I got you. Feast on my goodness in spite of what's happening. And regardless of the enemy's presence, David says, you honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. I'm focused on the blessings in my cup, and I'm not going to worry about them standing over me with hatred in their eyes. And this is what it boils down to for David. This is where he sums up. He says, surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life. If you're old enough like me, you probably might have memorized this psalm at one point. It was, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Follow is too puny a word for it. Sorry, King James. Pursue. The same word for this kind of pursuit is the same kind of word they use in the Old Testament when they were in battle with their enemies. And whoever was losing the battle, they would run away, run away to fight another day. And they'd go away, and then they'd come back and attack you later. And so if you had an enemy and you were getting the upper hand in the battle, you didn't let them get away alive. You chased them down and killed them, not to be brutal, but so that they didn't come back and get you in your sleep and kill your family. And that's the kind of pursuit. But this time, God is chasing us and pursuing us. Your goodness and your unfailing love chase me down like that. Like they track me like a wild animal. I'm running and I'm scared, but you're sending your love after me, and your love is pursuing me, even when I'm moving away from it and moving in the wrong direction. He says, your goodness and your unfailing love pursue me all the days of my life. Wherever I am, wherever I'm moving, whatever choices I've made and direction I've taken, you're pursuing me, you're chasing me down. You're after me with your love so that you can do good things for me. And so his goodness and an unfailing love track us down relentlessly. And David says, I will live in the house of the Lord forever. He says, if I could get to that place where I feel your presence so closely, I will stay there and I will never leave. If I could get close to you, God, like we were worshiping in the temple, I will never leave that place again. I will do everything in my power to be right there in that sweet spot next to you. And I don't know if you noticed as the psalm unpacked, but at the beginning, in the first few verses, when he's talking about the streams and the meadows, he says, like I say, it was personal. You provide for me. You guide me. It was this wonderful providence of God. But it's not till he gets to the valley that he stops talking about what God does for him, and he starts talking to God. And he says, your rod and your staff, not his rod and his staff. There's something about going through the valley and the hard times and the dark times. There's something about it that makes it even more personal and even more intimate. And it's a subtle shift for David. You almost don't notice, but if you see it, you can't unsee it. The ancients talked about the dark night of the soul, experiences they went through where it felt like Satan was just hammering them with everything, and they felt like they're about to break down. And they'd come through those times and say, there was something about it that drew me close to God. I had to rely on him completely. I was desperate for him because I had nothing left. And in that dark time, I learned to be closer to him. It pulled me back in a way that it might not have if it had all been sweet scenes and providence and protection. If I'd never gone through the dark time, I might never have been able to get there. And that's why David takes them through the good times and then the hard times. And then he says, look, eventually you gotta be able to do that good, sweet thing and see God and be intimate with God, even when the enemy is still right there, even when the circumstances are feeling crushing and they don't even back off for a minute. Even in those times, you got to lean on God. And he says, then I'm going to get there. I will make my journey. I will walk in that door and I will worship him with everything that's in me. I'm not leaving. Because when I get close to God, I never want to back away again. And you and I know what it is to face anxiety. You know what it is to have circumstances crush you. You know what it is to face worries of this life and for things to push you down and hold you down in ways that you think you will never get up again. But God can meet you in the middle of it. And David says, look, if we sing this song, it has some meaning because we all know what it is to be on that journey. We know what it is sometimes to have been provided for by God, and we know what it is to go through the dark times. But God shows up in the dark times. And if you're paying attention to him and not just to the enemies around you, You'll be able to focus on the goodness of God. And it will draw you to that place where your journey leads you to intense intimacy with God, closeness to his presence. And so the people all through the history of the people of God would latch onto this psalm, and it's the reason, it's what it's doing when we read it, when we sing it, when we think about it. And it really does its work. It reaches us on a deeper level than just a nice word picture. About 6 months ago when I was planning my preaching, I was looking for something to fit in next down the road. And we happened to be in a conversation, and Emma shared with me this song. We were swapping worship songs we discovered that we really liked, and she shared this song with me, and I'm going to ask her to come and sing it for you in a minute. But it was just such a beautiful image, and at the very beginning of the song, it talks about anxiety and what Psalm 23 does to that. So from the beginning, I knew this sermon, this passage had to be part of this series. And then I went hunting for other passages. I'm like, God, lead me to the stuff that'll help somebody who's really feeling weighted down, the people who are struggling with anxiety and feel like it's never going to end and it's just going to crush them. And so we've come across some of those passages in the last few weeks, but I thought we got to end on this note. And so I just invite you to spend some time reflecting as Emma sings this song for us. And I don't know if you're going through the rough times now or if it feels like you're in the meadow with the streams and everything's good, but if it's not happening now, it's coming. We all go through it to some degree or another. But no, not just when he's sweet and he's caring for you and you feel all the blessings. Be thankful for that. But when the dark times come, know that he is no less present. That even when the enemies are right there and all you seem to be able to see is the enemy crushing you down, know that if you pay attention, God will reveal himself in ways that draw you closer than you could ever been. And he always makes it better. And he always changes, not the circumstances, but there are changes that happen in us that mean that we can go through those circumstances and we can see him more than we see everything else. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing.